The dispute between India and Pakistan over Kashmir has been a flashpoint on the subcontinent ever since 1947. There are more than 500,000 troops positioned on the Indian side alone, but you don't hear much about it, and that's how the Indian authorities like it. Local reporters work under a strict curfew in Kashmir. Internet access is sporadic. Even text messaging services in the valley are frequently cut off by the powers that be. What has resulted journalistically is a government-led narrative rarely contested in mainstream media outlets. That started to change in 2010 when thousands of Kashmiris took to the streets and new online voices were heard for the first time. In the 2 years since, Kashmiri bloggers, filmmakers and authors have all taken their stories to web audiences in India, Pakistan and the world. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the rise of the Kashmiri alternative media collective.
It was called the Kashmiri Intifada. Thousands of protesters faced off against Indian troops and demanded an end to what they call the military occupation of Kashmir.
There certainly is a curfew in place, only police vehicles, ambulances in sight.
Journalists and camera teams have been intimidated and told to stay home.
There is this massive uprising against Indian rule in Kashmir, and lots of people, mostly young people, are killed on the streets of Kashmir. And at the same time, there are huge curbs on media in Kashmir. Newspapers don't go to press, local TV channels are taken off, there's a ban on text messaging. Even journalists who go to report are beaten up on the streets. So in that environment, a fascinating thing happens. All these young people, without a formal structure, converge, and there's this almost near explosion of new media activity in 2010.
Go to thekashmirwala.com today. The website is an insider's storybook of life in Kashmir. On one of its pages is a daily tracker of the text messaging ban that Indian authorities switch on and off in the valley. The site is run by Fahad Shah, who began the Kashmirwala as a blog and battled patchy internet connections and official clampdowns on reporting to photograph, write and publish all through the demonstrations of 2010.
In 2010, when protests started, I was working with a local newspaper. I was running this blog also. I was just writing the stories which erupted during protests. I was writing some stories on the profile of a person who died, who passed away, who was killed or something. There was a boy in our neighborhood. His name was Umar Koyum Bhatt. He was arrested on Friday afternoon, then taken to a police station. Then he was beaten up. He died. I went to his home and I talked to his family. I talked to the medical officials. I talked to the persons, administration persons, and then I wrote a full story on him.
Fahad Shah and many others like him didn't feel that there was enough coverage of what was happening on the ground.
There are shoot-at-sight orders, remember, in Kashmir for anyone disrupting the peace.
And if there was coverage, it wasn't the kind of coverage they wished to see. So that must have driven somebody like Fahad Shah, because there's suddenly this space for narrativization of what was happening. It becomes very popular because there is a need, there is a hunger from so-called alternate voices from Kashmir.
And the alternative voices are making themselves heard online. Roshan Elahi, who calls himself MC Cash, is a rapper from Kashmir's capital city, Srinagar. He released his first song, I Protest, on YouTube at the height of the 2010 demonstrations.
Sponsored media who hide this homicide.
Elahi's song went viral and became the anthem for many young Kashmiris facing off against Indian troops. Kashmiri news media is moving online as well. The Kashmir Reader, Kashmir Dispatch and the Vox Kashmir reflect a view from the ground that you won't get from mainstream news correspondents reporting from the press enclave in Srinagar. The people clicking onto these sites are from all over the world, but their most significant readerships are to be found in India and Pakistan. The two countries have fought 3 wars over Kashmir, and the mainstream media narratives in both countries have become deeply politicized.
Does going back to pre-1953 for Jammu and Kashmir really emerge as a solution?
On the Indian side, there's a fairly orthodox position on Kashmir, which sees it as an internal matter of India, and Pakistan as the interloper. And of course, this is mirrored in Pakistan, where they believe that this is the unfinished agenda of Pakistan. Historically, that's how Kashmir has been constructed. As a dispute between India and Pakistan, and the mainstream media on both sides has consistently, that's the way it has chosen to represent it.
Mainstream media reports to some certain level, after which they don't move. They just maintain a balance, maybe to maintain peace, but people don't find it good. People find it biased.
This generation of Kashmiris, many of them are fed up with this mediation by Indian and Pakistani media. So somewhere down the line, what happens is, as this generation grows up, they think that we can do this. You know, if somebody can come from Delhi or Bombay and do a cover story on Kashmir, and at some point these people must have thought, we live here and we can write and we can do this. It's also a political statement that we do not accept your version of events here.
They do not accept it, and they are beginning to change it. Kashmir's journalists and writers are not just growing louder and bolder. They've begun to have an impact on how the mainstream media report the Kashmir story.
It's not so much what the news media is carrying, but what it pushes the mainstream media into doing, which has become significant.
Kashmir's generation next has taken to the internet.
Those alternative voices are beginning to color the mainstream discourse. I'm not saying that it has been able to dislodge it, but people are beginning to, for the first time, both in India and Pakistan, concede that there is a third element in this conversation, which is the voice of the Kashmiri people.
These websites and these blogs, they put daily pressure on newspapers because they will publish something on the front page or the inside pages, and then they see the same story covered in these websites in different ways, or with a different perspective, or even a different side to the story. So which means those editors and those journalists are constantly reading these things, and sometimes they have no option but to incorporate what's appearing in alternate media into their journalism and reportage and coverage, which I think is a brilliant thing.
Because it signals that the Kashmiri voice is moving from graffiti on the streets to websites on the internet, from the fringes of the debate to the center of the discussion, from what they call alternative spaces onto the front pages in the mainstream media.